Welcome back. You're watching Big Deal and we are discussing the new era of regulations of social media in the country. So Tejasvi, you were making some very interesting and important legal points. I want to understand the new introduction of this GAC that has been proposed by the government. How is that going to be legally tenable, especially when it's a government committee? And how do the other developed, countries deal with this issue? Are they autonomous with more powers to an advisory body or an appellate body to really take into cognizance the customers' grievances?
Thank you, Nisha, for raising this, because honestly, I think we do need to spend some time on discussing the concerns around the GAC's legal basis. So firstly, it is a settled principle that any adjudicatory body, such as the GAC, which essentially is settling disputes between parties, can only be constituted by the legislature. And here there has been no law that's been enacted by the parliament empowering the executive to do so. So the constitutionality of the GAC itself is a question here. And the IT amendment rules are an amendment to the IT rules, which is a delegated legislation and not a statute that's been passed by the parliament. Also, it's important to note here that any rule that's notified by the executive, such as the IT rules, must be traceable to its parent act, and in this case, it's the IT Act 2000. However, the IT Act does not contemplate appointment of any such committee. So there is no legislative basis on which the union government has the power to create such a body. And on top of that, given that it's a government-appointed body, as you rightly mentioned, it can have immediate and far-reaching impact on citizens' fundamental rights, that too with little to no procedural safeguards built into the scheme of IT rules itself. In terms of the developments across the world, one example I would like to bring here is Ofcom, which is the regulatory and competition authority in the UK, which is not in itself perfect, but is independent in its appointment and has a history of functioning and working fairly independently. Now, even if we look at some examples such as Singapore, which has an authority that regulates both communication and media sectors, and also Turkey, which has a regulatory framework to moderate content on the internet, none of them have a government-appointed oversight mechanism, which makes bureaucrats arbiters of permissible speech on the internet, which is why, in my opinion, the creation of a GAC needs to be unequivocally criticized.
Right.
Because the GAC will
okay,
have
Tejasvi, you made your point. Most of these agencies that you have mentioned across the world are autonomous in nature. I remember the evolution of Competition Commission of India. It gained in its power and teeth and became more autonomous as a body. Now, when we talk about CCI, Siddharth, what came as a shock for the entire startup industry and the tech digital world was also the recent CCI order on Google Play. How do we see the overall broad messaging on these kind of rulings now?
No, I think, Nisha, so first off, the particular ruling was actually greatly by the entire Indian startup ecosystem itself. A number of them have actually been deplatformed by the Google Play Store. A number have seen a large amount of their revenue actually been taken up by the global Play Store itself, by the Google Play Store, and the inability to actually create any other alternate sort of payment mechanisms or payment gateways has severely inhibited these particular companies from operating on that particular ecosystem itself. I think the messaging from the government is actually quite clear in this regard. If you are a large tech monopoly, they're going to start treating you like a utility company itself. So they are going to have very thick regulations around that to ensure that your monopoly position can't end up being exploited at the expense of either users or the expense of companies that you end up catering to as well. So I think from the government's actions and from the CCI ruling also, this is something that actually has global precedence as part of that. So I don't see India actually taking up a contrary stance in that particular part itself. And from the GAC perspective also, I think given the legality of the GAC is something that be decided by the courts. But I think the intent of them therefore is very simple. If you are a monopoly, you can't abuse your particular power. You will actually end up being regulated as part of it. So the bigger you are, the greater the level of regulatory scrutiny you will actually end up coming under as well. And not just for social media companies, but for e-commerce companies, for payment companies to NPCI, and for any other industry that technology has actually pervaded into.
Right. Yeah. So point made, Siddharth Pai, and we understand that every piece of the new age businesses are getting regulated, and the regulatory bodies and the government is also evolving as the sector is evolving. But Ajay Roti, put some thought in the larger perspective that you have on the GAC formation. Everybody has made their point, and Tejasvi raised a very important point that it's not an autonomous body; it's going to be a government body. What is your view on overall, concept of a GAC and the way social media is getting regulated? And on the other hand, while Twitter is pushing the pedal on free speech at the moment, we have seen various instances in India where, because of your leaning either religious or political, there have been some high-handedness by the authorities.
So, Nisha, I think the one thing that we have to remember here is that the GAC is actually, in that sense, an appellate forum, which means it is the forum to which you take a grievance against a decision by the grievance officer. So it's not really the first stage for anybody to approach if there are posts or if there are material on social media that you would want to complain against. Therefore, to that effect, if the intermediary is performing its function, the grievance officer is addressing the grievances of the users, you don't really end up before the GAC. That's the first point. Therefore, the government has also clearly stated that the GAC is coming in because at this point, they felt that self-governing through a governance officer, a grievance officer, was not really very effective because nobody had named anybody worthwhile, and that mechanism doesn't seem to have worked well in the last few weeks or months. It's a short time, but that's their view, and that's the reason they have brought in the GAC. Of course, the GAC has two government-appointed members. Interestingly, one of the sub-rules give power to the GAC to actually seek assistance from anybody who's an expert in this field. So, how that will play out, how will the GAC actually deal with these appeals is something that we'll have to wait and see.
All right, so it will evolve, and intent is good, but how that power dynamics play out also needs to be seen very, very closely, because it's also about fundamental rights as well as free speech. One bouncer question to end with, Siddharth Pai. Would you pay $8 for your free speech on Twitter?
No, not worth the price, honestly. If they do follow Google's playbook and have a lower price for India, maybe, but $8 far too much.
All right, so that's a big debate, and everybody is telling them to come up with a different business model altogether to make money. But thank you so much, Tejasvi, Ajay, as well as Siddharth Pai, for joining us on this very interesting discussion. These are early days. Of course, this particular space is going to be very exciting with the free speech aspect, government control, as well as the control, as well as accountability of the tech intermediaries as well. So it's going to be very, very interesting, and we'll all live and learn as this particular sector and the regulations around it really evolves. With that, thank you so much for joining us on Big Deal.